I'm Madison Grant, 22, female. I live in a small third-floor apartment that's usually filled with the scent of coffee and the low hum of my laptop. For the past year, I've been balancing a part-time barista job with freelance writing gigs, all while planning what was supposed to be the perfect wedding. My life was a carefully constructed tower of dreams, and I was just days away from placing the final, sparkling piece on top. But this story isn't about a wedding. It's about what happens when that entire tower comes crashing down, and you're forced to build something new from the rubble in the last place you ever expected to find yourself. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The apartment was a chaotic explosion of tulle, ribbon, and lists. My best friend and maid of honor, Chloe, sat cross-legged on the floor, expertly tying tiny silver bows onto favor boxes. The scent of vanilla cupcakes, our chosen wedding flavor, still lingered from the final tasting 2 days ago. Everything felt surreal, like the final scene of a romantic movie where all the pieces were finally falling into place. My dress, a simple but elegant A-line gown, was hanging in a protective bag on my bedroom door, a constant, beautiful reminder that my new life was only 5 days away. "Are you sure you don't want to go with the lavender ribbons?" Chloe asked, holding one up. "It matches the bridesmaid dresses a little better." I shook my head, smiling. "No, the silver is perfect. It matches the rings." I wiggled my fingers, admiring the engagement ring Ryan had given me a year ago. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. He'd told me it symbolized a promise of a solid, shining future. Ryan, lately, he'd been distant. I told myself it was just stress. He was a real estate agent, and the market had been unpredictable. He was working late almost every night, often coming home after I was already asleep and leaving before I woke up. When I did see him, his smile seemed a little tight, his hugs a little brief. He's just got cold feet. I told Chloe last week over coffee. It's a huge commitment. He's probably just overwhelmed with everything. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, had raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Cold feet is one thing, Maddie. Being a ghost is another. Have you actually talked to him about it?" I had tried. Last night, when he'd come in reeking of expensive cologne I didn't recognize, I'd asked if everything was okay. He just brushed a hand through his perfectly styled hair and mumbled something about a client dinner that ran late. He avoided my eyes and claimed he was exhausted, falling asleep on the couch instead of coming to bed. The distance felt like a physical presence in our small apartment, a cold spot I couldn't seem to warm up. But then this morning he'd left a single red rose on the kitchen counter with a note. "Can't wait to make you my wife. Love, R." The relief that washed over me was immense. All my fears felt silly and unfounded. Of course he was stressed. We both were. We'd poured every penny we had into this wedding, my freelance checks and barista tips, his commission bonuses. It was all tied up in deposits for the venue, the caterer, the photographer. We were starting our new life with practically zero savings, but we had agreed it was worth it to have the perfect day to launch our perfect future. "Okay, that's the last of the favors," Chloe announced, snapping me out of my thoughts. She stood up, brushing dust off her jeans. "You should try to get some rest. The next few days are going to be a whirlwind." She was right. I had a final dress fitting tomorrow, and we had to pick up his tuxedo the day after. Family would start arriving in 3 days. The timeline was packed, every minute accounted for. I gave Chloe a tight hug, thanking her for everything. After she left, the apartment felt quiet, almost too quiet. I looked around at the boxes, the lists, the dress hanging on the door. It was all so close. I sent Ryan a quick text. "Thinking of you. Hope work isn't too crazy. Can't wait for you to be home." Hours passed. The sun set, casting long shadows across the living room. My text remained unanswered. I made a simple dinner for one and ate it while watching TV, telling myself his phone probably died or he was stuck in a meeting. But as the clock ticked past midnight and the space next to me in bed remained empty, a familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The single red rose on the counter seemed to mock me, a beautiful lie in a silent room. I woke up with a jolt at 3 a.m. to a cold, empty bed. A frantic check of my phone revealed no missed calls, no text from Ryan, just my unanswered one from hours earlier. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my consciousness. This wasn't like him. Even on his latest nights, he'd at least send a quick heading home message. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. My mind raced through a horrifying list of possibilities. Had he been in an accident? Was he hurt? I was about to call the local hospitals when my phone buzzed with a notification. Voicemail from Ryan. My heart leaped with a confusing mix of relief and dread. I pressed play, my hand trembling as I held the phone to my ear. It wasn't his voice at first. It was the muffled sound of music, laughter, and a woman's voice in the background. Then Ryan spoke, his words clipped and devoid of any emotion. "Maddie, hey, look, I can't do this. I'm sorry, the wedding, all of it. It's off. I've moved my things out of the storage unit already. I'll have a friend get the rest of my stuff from the apartment next week. Don't call me." The message was 22 seconds long. 22 seconds that took a sledgehammer to the foundation of my life. I listened to it again, and then a third time, certain I must have misunderstood. But the words didn't change. "I can't do this. It's off. Don't call me." There was no explanation, no remorse, just a cold, clinical severing of our life together. The woman's laugh echoed in the background of the recording, a ghost at the funeral of my relationship. I stumbled out of bed and into the living room. It took me a moment to realize what was wrong. His laptop was gone from the small desk we shared. His favorite jacket was missing from the hook by the door. His gym bag, always tossed in the corner, was gone. He hadn't just decided this tonight. He had planned it. He had been quietly removing his life from mine while I was busy addressing invitations and picking out flowers. The first call I made was to Chloe, my words choked by sobs that I couldn't control. She was at my door in 15 minutes, her face a mask of fury and concern. She held me as I fell apart as the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. The wedding was in 4 days. 400 people were expecting to see me walk down the aisle. My parents, his parents, our friends, they were all on their way, some already flying in. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliating phone calls. With Chloe sitting beside me, a phone in one hand and a tissue box in the other, we started dismantling my future, piece by painful piece. "Hello, Petal and Post. I'm calling to cancel the floral order for the Grant Thompson wedding. Hi, I need to speak to someone about canceling a catering contract for this Saturday. Is it possible to get a refund on a venue deposit for a cancellation due to unforeseen circumstances?" The answer was almost always the same. "I'm so sorry, but with such short notice, the deposit is non-refundable." Every call was a fresh wave of humiliation. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the band. Thousands of dollars gone. It was money we didn't have, money I now owed alone. I had to call my parents and tell them their daughter's wedding was off, that the man they were about to call their son-in-law had vanished. My dad's heartbroken silence on the other end of the line was worse than any angry words could have been. Then came the guests. Chloe and I divided the list and started making the calls, a rehearsed, hollow script falling from my lips. "Hi, I'm calling with some difficult news. The wedding has been cancelled. I'm so sorry for any inconvenience." Some people were kind. Others were full of intrusive questions I couldn't answer. "What happened? Did you two have a fight? Is he okay? I didn't know." I didn't know anything except that the man I was supposed to spend my life with had disposed of me via voicemail, leaving me to clean up the emotional and financial wreckage alone. The dress in the bag on my door was no longer a symbol of hope. It was a 5-foot tall monument to my own foolishness. 2 months later, the wreckage was still my reality. The sympathy cards had stopped coming, and the concerned calls had trickled to a halt. Everyone else's life had moved on, while I was stuck in the crater where my future used to be. I was broke, utterly and completely broke. The non-refundable deposits had wiped out my savings, and now the bills for the remaining balances were starting to arrive, each one addressed to me. Ryan had disappeared without a trace. He'd blocked my number, deleted his social media, and left his old job. It was as if he'd never existed. My part-time barista job and the occasional freelance article weren't enough to cover my rent, let alone the mountain of wedding-related debt. I was selling furniture online and eating instant noodles for dinner most nights. My dream of being a journalist felt like a joke. I didn't have the time or energy to chase stories. I was too busy trying to survive. One night, scrolling through job sites in a desperate haze, I stumbled upon an unusual advertisement. It was posted under the domestic help section, but the description was vague and intriguing. Seeking a personal companion and assistant for a private residence. Duties include reading aloud, managing schedules, and providing engaging companionship. Must be articulate, discreet, and patient. Excellent communication skills required. Live in position with all expenses covered. Salary highly competitive and negotiable. A strict non-disclosure agreement is mandatory. There was no company name, just a reference code and an email address. It sounded strange, almost too good to be true. A live-in position would solve my immediate problem of rent. Engaging companionship sounded odd, but reading aloud and managing schedules were things I could do. My journalism degree meant I was articulate, and my current situation had taught me a lot about being discreet. With nothing left to lose, I drafted a cover letter, attached my resume, and hit send, figuring I'd never hear back. To my astonishment, I received a reply the next morning. It was from an Eve Vance, on behalf of a private employer. The email was formal and requested an immediate video interview. The interview, conducted that afternoon, was with a stern-looking woman in her late 50s or early 60s with perfectly coiffed gray hair and an air of no-nonsense efficiency. This was Eleanor Vance. She asked me pointed questions about my background, my education, and my ability to handle stress. She never once mentioned who my potential employer was, referring to him only as Mr. Sterling. I was honest. I told her I was a recent graduate, that I was passionate about literature and current events, and that I was looking for a stable opportunity to get back on my feet after a difficult personal setback. I didn't overshare, but I think she sensed the desperation beneath my professional demeanor. At the end of the call, she looked at me intently and said, "The final part of this interview is an in-person meeting at the estate. A car will be sent for you tomorrow morning at 10. Please bring an overnight bag. If Mr. Sterling approves, your employment will begin immediately." The next morning, a sleek black town car, the kind you see in movies, pulled up outside my run-down apartment building. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, opened the door for me. We drove for over an hour, leaving the city behind and winding our way into the wealthy, forested hills of the countryside. We eventually turned onto a private road and pulled up to a set of imposing iron gates. They swung open silently, and we proceeded down a long driveway flanked by ancient oak trees. The mansion, that came into view was breathtaking. It was a modern architectural marvel of glass, steel, and dark stone, built into the side of a hill with a panoramic view of the valley below. It was beautiful, but also isolated and intimidating. This was the Gilded Cage. Eleanor Vance greeted me at the door. Her expression was as severe as it had been on the video call. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous, minimalist foyer. "Follow me." Eleanor led me through hallways that felt more like a modern art gallery than a home. The walls were lined with abstract paintings, and the sparse furniture was sleek and expensive. The only sounds were the soft echo of our footsteps on the polished concrete floors. We stopped before a large oak door, and Eleanor knocked once before opening it. "Madison Grant, sir," she announced. The room was a massive library with floor-to-ceiling windows on one side offering a stunning view of the forest, and bookshelves crammed with thousands of volumes on the other three. In the center of the room, positioned to face the windows, was a man in a highly advanced, motorized wheelchair. He turned as I entered, and my breath caught in my throat. I had expected someone much older, perhaps frail. But Alexander Sterling was only in his early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a strong jawline, and dark hair lightly peppered with gray at the temples. He had the kind of intense presence that immediately commanded a room. The only thing that betrayed his vulnerability was the chair he sat in. "Miss Grant," he said, his voice a deep baritone, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to a leather armchair opposite him. I sat down, my hands clasped nervously in my lap. Eleanor remained standing by the door, a silent sentinel. "Eleanor tells me you're an aspiring journalist," he began, his gaze analytical. "A student of stories, that's good, because my life, for the time being, is composed mostly of stories written by others." He gestured to the walls of books. "My own story is on a rather indefinite pause." He explained the terms of the job. It was even stranger than the ad had suggested. 3 years ago, he had been in a severe car accident that had left him with a spinal cord injury. He was the founder of Sterling Dynamics, a revolutionary tech company, but he had since withdrawn from public life entirely, becoming a recluse. My job was not to be a nurse. He had a team of medical professionals for his physical needs. My job was to be his connection to the world of words. I would read him the news every morning from multiple sources. I would read him fiction and nonfiction, research topics that interested him, and help him organize his extensive personal and professional archives. Most importantly, I was to provide conversation. "The silence in this house can be deafening," he admitted, a flicker of something, sadness, maybe, in his eyes. Elinor is efficient, but not much for small talk. I require someone who can challenge my ideas. I require someone who can challenge my ideas, debate a topic, and not be intimidated by my circumstances. We talked for over an hour. He asked me about my favorite authors, my thesis, my thoughts on current global events. It felt less like a job interview and more like a rigorous intellectual examination. He was brilliant, his mind moving at a speed that was both exhilarating and daunting. For the first time in months, I felt alive, my brain sparking with energy as I tried to keep up with him. I completely forgot to be nervous. At the end of our conversation, he looked over at Elinor and gave a slight nod. "She'll do," he said simply, and just like that, I was employed. My old life, my tiny apartment, my barista apron, it all felt a world away. Elinor showed me to my room, which was more like a luxury suite, with its own bathroom and a private balcony overlooking the estate grounds. My belongings, she informed me, would be collected from my apartment and delivered the next day. The salary she quoted was more money than I had ever dreamed of making. The first few weeks were a strange adjustment. The house was governed by a strict routine. Mornings were for news and correspondence. Afternoons were for reading. We started with classic philosophy and moved on to modern physics. Evenings were often spent in quiet conversation, or sometimes he would simply ask me to describe the world outside the window. He rarely spoke of his past and never of the accident. Elinor remained a formal, watchful presence, ensuring the household ran with perfect precision. She was polite but distant, and I got the distinct impression she was waiting for me to fail. I learned that Alexander Sterling wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the most innovative minds of his generation. His company had pioneered technology I used every day. Yet here he was, trapped in this beautiful prison, his world shrunk to the confines of his estate. I began to see that beneath his formidable intellect and cynical exterior was a profound loneliness. He had built an empire, but the accident had exiled him from it. My job wasn't just to read to him, it was to be a bridge back to the world he had lost. As autumn bled into winter, the rhythm of life at the Sterling estate became my new normal. The initial intimidation I felt in Alexander's presence slowly melted away, replaced by a comfortable rapport. Our debates grew more spirited, our conversations more personal. He started asking about my life, my family, and my abandoned dreams of journalism. One afternoon, while I was reading an article about investigative reporting, he suddenly powered down his tablet and looked at me. "You have a good mind for this, Madison," he said. "You don't just read the words, you analyze them. You question the source, the motive. Why did you give it up?" I hesitated, the memory of Ryan still a tender bruise. "Life got in the way," I said vaguely. He didn't press, but his silence was expectant. So I told him everything. The wedding, the voicemail, the crushing debt, the humiliation. I expected pity, or perhaps a dismissive remark about youthful folly. Instead, he listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Revenge is a cold and empty pursuit," he said finally. "But purpose is the greatest vindication. You have a purpose, Madison. You just let someone convince you it wasn't worth fighting for." That conversation was a turning point. The next day, he gave me a new assignment. He wanted to write his memoirs not for publication, but for himself, to document the rise of his company and the ideas that had driven him, but he didn't want a ghostwriter, he wanted a collaborator. He tasked me with interviewing him, organizing his decades of notes, and structuring the narrative. "Use your journalism skills." He challenged me, ask me the hard questions, find the real story, not the one everyone prints in magazines. The project consumed me. I spent weeks poring over old files, blueprints, and journals. I interviewed Alexander for hours every day, pushing him to recall details he thought he had forgotten. I was no longer just his companion. I was a biographer, an archivist, a journalist. I was using my skills in a way I had only dreamed of. The work was demanding and incredibly fulfilling. For the first time since the breakup, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I started writing again, not just his story, but my own. I started a professional blog on tech ethics and innovation, using the incredible access I had to Alexander's library and insights. He read every post, offering sharp critiques and encouraging me to dig deeper. My confidence, so completely shattered by Ryan, began to rebuild itself brick by brick. My relationship with Elinor also began to thaw. She saw the change in Alexander. He was more engaged, more energetic than she had seen him in years. One evening, as I was making tea in the kitchen, she came in and stood beside me at the counter. "You've been good for him, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "This house was a tomb before you came. You brought a bit of life back into it." Her words meant more to me than she could ever know. I had come to this gilded cage as a refugee from my own life, expecting only to be a well-paid servant, but I had found something else entirely. I had found my voice. My plan was no longer about getting even with Ryan or dwelling on the past. My plan was to build a future so bright and successful that the shadow of my old life couldn't touch it. The anger and hurt I felt towards Ryan hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a weight holding me down, but fuel for my own ambition. One brisk March morning, an invitation arrived that sent a ripple through the quiet order of the estate. It was for the annual Innovators Charity Gala, one of the most prestigious events in the tech industry. Alexander had been a founding member but hadn't attended since his accident. Every year, he sent a sizable donation in his place. This year, however, was different. He rolled into the library holding the thick, cream-colored envelope. "They're honoring one of my earliest mentors," he said, his expression thoughtful. "I should be there." Eleanor, who was organizing his schedule, immediately protested. "Sir, the logistics, the press. You haven't made a public appearance in 3 years, which is precisely why I must go." He countered, "People are starting to think I'm either dead or have lost my mind. It's time to remind them I'm still in the game." He then turned his attention to me. "And you'll be coming with me, Madison, as my executive assistant and head of communications." I was stunned. "Me, but I don't have anything to wear to something like that." Alexander waved a dismissive hand. "Eleanor will arrange for a stylist. That's the easy part. The hard part will be navigating a room full of sharks. I'll need you by my side." The 2 weeks leading up to the gala were a flurry of activity. A discreet stylist visited the estate, and I was fitted for an elegant, deep navy gown that made me feel more confident than I had in years. Alexander and I prepped relentlessly, going over a list of attendees, potential talking points, and strategies for handling the inevitable media attention. I felt like a student cramming for the most important exam of her life. The night of the gala, I was a nervous wreck, but Alexander was a picture of calm authority. As we entered the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. The return of Alexander Sterling was an event in itself. Heads turned, and whispers followed us as I navigated his wheelchair through the throng of tech billionaires and industry titans. He handled it all with a grace and power that amazed me, greeting old colleagues and deflecting intrusive questions with sharp wit. I stayed close, taking notes, facilitating introductions, and feeling a surge of pride in my role. We were speaking with the CEO of a major software company when a familiar voice cut through the air. "Maddie, is that you?" My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, and there he was, Ryan. He was dressed in a tailored suit that was clearly too expensive for him, and on his arm was a glamorous woman dripping in diamonds. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, raking over my gown and my proximity to the legendary Alexander Sterling. "Wow," he said, a smug smirk spreading across his face. "I guess you're working the catering staff tonight. Good for you, landing on your feet." His words were designed to humiliate, to put me back in the box he'd left me in. The woman on his arm giggled. Before I could even form a response, Alexander moved his chair forward slightly, placing himself between me and Ryan. He extended a hand not to Ryan, but to the woman, Alexander Sterling. He said, his voice dangerously calm, "And you are." The woman's eyes went wide. "Oh, I'm Tiffany. It's an honor to meet you, sir. This is my fiancé, Ryan Thompson." Alexander's gaze shifted to Ryan, and it was utterly glacial. He ignored Ryan's outstretched hand. "Thompson," he said, letting the name hang in the air. "You must be the real estate agent who specializes in. What is it, quick demolitions and leaving the cleanup to others?" Ryan's face paled. I don't know what you mean, don't you?" Alexander continued, his voice never rising but cutting through the noise of the ballroom. "Miss Grant is my head of communications and my personal biographer. She is one of the most intelligent and resilient people I have ever had the pleasure of working with. Her insights are helping to shape the future of my entire enterprise." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "So you'll forgive me if I find it puzzling that someone with her value would have ever been associated with someone of such obvious poor judgment." The public rebuke was devastating. People nearby had stopped to listen. Ryan's new fiancée, Tiffany, was looking at him with a horrified expression. Ryan just stood there, sputtering, his face turning a blotchy red. This was my moment. The old me would have cried or screamed. But the woman standing in the navy gown was different. I looked Ryan directly in the eye, my voice steady and clear. It's Madison, actually, and Alexander is right. It was a lapse in judgment, one I'm happy to say I've fully recovered from. I gave him a small, dismissive smile, then turned my back on him. Alexander, I said, my voice all business, we should go and greet Senator Davis. As I pushed his chair away, leaving Ryan humiliated in our wake, I felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. He hadn't destroyed me. He had, in his own cruel way, set me free. The drive back to the estate was quiet. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a feeling of calm finality. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, realizing I hadn't thought about Ryan once after we walked away. He had been reduced to a footnote in a much more interesting story, my own. When we arrived, Alexander dismissed his evening nurse and asked me to join him in the library. He poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, handing one to me. You handled yourself with remarkable poise tonight, Madison, he said, breaking the silence. I had a good teacher, I replied, taking a sip. Thank you, Alexander, for what you did back there. I only stated the truth. He said simply, he was a fool to let you go. His loss has been my considerable gain. He navigated his chair over to his large mahogany desk and picked up a folder. He rolled back over to me and handed it to me. You're one. Your contract is up for review next week, he said. This is my proposal. I opened the folder, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Inside was not a renewal of my current contract as a companion and assistant. It was a formal offer of employment for a newly created position, Director of Strategic Communications and Archival Development for the Sterling Foundation. It came with a staggering salary, full benefits, a research budget, and funding to complete my master's degree in journalism. It was, in short, my dream, a dream I had given up on, now being handed to me on a silver platter. No, not handed to me. It was something I had earned. The foundation is my new focus, Alexander explained. We're going to be funding scholarships for underprivileged students in STEM, investing in accessible technology, and creating grants for investigative journalists. I need someone to run it, someone I trust, someone who understands the power of a story. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. I don't know what to say, I stammered. Say you'll accept, he said, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. Your desk is already being installed in the West Wing office. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. That night marked the end of one chapter and the true beginning of another. I was no longer Madison Grant, the jilted fiancé. I was no longer a live-in caregiver. I was a director, a writer, a strategist. The Sterling estate was no longer a gilded cage. It was my headquarters, my sanctuary, my home. My relationship with Alexander evolved into a deep and powerful partnership. We were a team driven by a shared purpose. The future I was living was nothing like the one I had so meticulously planned with Ryan, with its white picket fences and suburban dreams. This future was bigger, more challenging, and infinitely more rewarding. I had been abandoned just days before a ceremony that was meant to define my life, only to find my true calling in the service of a wheelchair-bound mogul. I had lost a fiancé, but I had found myself. And it turned out that was the happy ending I had been looking for all along.